The mountain air was cold and clean. Pulled her jacket and looked at the stars above. She had come to the mountains alone because she needed silence. Her job as a public defender was hard. Every day she fought for people who had nothing. Every day she lost more fights than she won. The mountains helped her remember why she kept trying. She was about to turn back to her small tent when the light appeared. It came from nowhere. One moment there was only darkness and stars. The next moment there was a beam of white light so bright that could not see anything else. She tried to run, but her legs would not move. She tried to scream, but no sound came from her throat. The light pulled her upward like a hand lifting a small doll. Then everything went black. When opened her eyes, she was inside a box. The walls were clear like glass, but harder than any glass she had ever touched. The air smelled wrong. It tasted like metal and something sweet that made her stomach turn. She pushed against the walls, but they did not move. She hit them with her fists until her hands hurt. Nothing happened. Outside her box, she could see a long hallway. The walls were dark gray and covered with strange symbols that glowed soft blue. Other boxes lined the hallway, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Inside each box was a creature. Some had too many arms. Some had no arms at all. One looked like a ball of moving light. Another was just a pool of dark liquid that kept changing shape. Screamed until her throat was raw. No one came. Hours passed, maybe days. She could not tell. There was no sun here, no clock, nothing to mark time. She slept on the hard floor of her box. She woke up and found small packets of something that might have been food. It tasted like nothing, but it stopped her hunger. Water came from a tiny hole in the wall when she pressed a button she found by accident. On what she guessed was the third day, they came. The creatures that walked down the hallway were tall and thin. They had hard shells on their bodies like insects. Their heads were shaped like triangles and covered with many small eyes that all moved in different directions. Their arms bent in too many places. When they walked, their legs made clicking sounds on the metal floor. One of them stopped in front of the box. It looked at her with all its eyes. It made sounds that meant nothing to her. Then it pressed something on the side of her box, and a small screen appeared in the air. Watched as symbols flowed across the screen. She could not read them, but she understood what was happening. They were studying her, measuring her, deciding what she was worth. The creature made more sounds. Another one came, and they seemed to talk to each other. Then the first one touched the screen again, and something changed. A symbol appeared that would later learn meant Category 7. Another symbol meant fragile. The creatures lost interest after that. They moved on to other boxes, other prisoners. Was not special to them. She was just another small thing they had collected. In the days that followed, learned more about where she was. She learned by watching. The ship, because that was what it was, stopped at different places. Sometimes new boxes came in. Sometimes boxes left. The creatures in shells walked past many times each day. They never spoke to the prisoners. They never opened the boxes. They just watched and made notes on their glowing screens. Started to notice patterns. The creatures treated different prisoners differently. Some boxes had better food. Some had more space. Some prisoners were taken out and never came back. She saw that the symbol on each box determined everything. Prisoners with certain symbols were treated well. Prisoners with other symbols were ignored. Her symbol, Category 7, meant she was at the bottom. She met the being in the box next to hers on what might have been her 10th day. Its name was, and it came from a world of endless ice. Was small like, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. It could not speak, but it could make pictures appear in the air between their boxes. Through these pictures, taught things. The creatures in shells were called. They traveled between stars and collected living things from many worlds. They did not kill what they collected. They sold it. There were markets in space where beings like and were bought and sold like animals, like pets, like objects. Category 7 meant fragile. It meant weak. It meant not important. Learned that fragile beings never lasted long after being sold. The universe was dangerous for soft things. Buyers liked Category 7 beings because they were rare. They were rare because they kept dying. This information should have made afraid. Instead, it made her angry. She had spent her whole adult life fighting systems that crushed small people. She had stood in courtrooms and argued for people everyone else had given up on. She had lost many times, but she had never stopped fighting. She was not going to stop now. Every day watched the. She studied how they moved and how they acted. She listened to their language even though she did not understand it. She looked at their screens whenever they came close. She started to notice that some symbols appeared again and again. She began to memorize them. Helped when it could. It drew pictures of things needed to know. It showed her maps of the ship. It showed her what waited at the end of their journey, a place called Station, a market where they would be sold. The night before the ship reached, lay on the floor of her box and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her life on Earth, her small apartment, her difficult job, her mother who called every Sunday to ask when she would get married, her cat that a neighbor was probably feeding now, wondering where had gone. She thought about all the clients she had defended, people accused of crimes they did not commit, people too poor to fight back, people the system had decided were worthless. Now she was one of them, but had learned something in all her years of fighting. Systems were made by people, or in this case by beings, and anything made by beings had weaknesses, had rules, had cracks that a careful person could find and use. They had made a mistake. They had looked at her soft skin and her breakable bones and decided she was nothing. They had put her in a box and marked her as fragile. They had not tested her mind. As the ship slowed and the lights of Station appeared outside the small window at the end of the hallway, made herself a promise. She would find the cracks in this system. She would learn its rules, and she would break it apart. One way or another, she was going to survive. Station was bigger than any city had ever seen. It floated in space between broken pieces of rock and ice, a massive structure of metal and lights that seemed to go on forever. Ships came and went like insects around a hive. Through the small window of her transport container, counted hundreds of them before she stopped trying. They moved the prisoners quickly. His box was loaded onto a floating platform along with 30 others. They traveled through long tunnels filled with noise and strange smells. Beings of every shape walked past without looking at them. Here, prisoners in boxes were nothing special. The market hall was a vast open space with a ceiling so high could barely see it. Rows and rows of platforms held boxes like hers. Buyers walked between them, pointing at this creature or that one. Some buyers were small, some were huge, some floated in the air, some crawled on many legs, saw things that her mind could not understand, things that should not exist but did. Her auction lasted only a few minutes. A creature made of something like jelly bought her for what seemed like a small amount. The jelly creature's name was, and it collected fragile things. His home was on the wealthy side of the station. It was a large space filled with special containers, each one holding a different being. The temperature was warm and the light was soft. It would have been comfortable if was not a prisoner. Her new box was bigger than the one on the ship. It had a soft floor for sleeping and a small area for washing. The food was better too. Took care of its collection because damaged goods lost value. Was property now, and property needed to be maintained. In her first week, met the other beings in its collection. Nearest to her was a creature named Bora. Bora was made of something like crystal. She was beautiful, with light shining through her body and making rainbows on the walls. But Bora was dying. The air in the station was too dry. Every day, small cracks appeared on her surface. Tried to keep her container wet, but it was never enough. On her other side was a gas creature trapped inside a special sphere. He could not survive in normal air. One crack in his sphere and he would float away and die. He had been in his collection for 2 years. He was the oldest living being there. There were others too. A small furry creature that could not handle loud sounds. A being made of light that grew weak in darkness. A water creature that needed exactly the right amount of salt or its skin would burn. All of them were Category 7. All of them were fragile. All of them were considered too weak to have rights. Spent her first month learning. Bora could speak the common trade language of the station. She taught word by word, day by day. It was slow work but never stopped trying. She practiced when she woke up. She practiced before she slept. She practiced in her dreams. New things about the station and the galaxy beyond. He told about the Galactic Concord, the government that ruled most of known space. He told her about its laws and its courts. He told her about the different species that held power and the ones that had none. The most important thing he told her was this: the Concord had rules about sapient beings. Sapient meant intelligent. Sapient meant aware. Sapient beings could not be owned. They had rights. But Category 7 beings were not considered sapient. They were classified as animals, as objects, as things without real thoughts or feelings. Asked how this was decided. How did the Conquered know which beings were sapient and which were not? His answer changed everything. There were supposed to be tests. The original laws of the Conquered required cognitive testing for any new species. A being had to be evaluated before it could be classified. This was in something called the Founding Compact, the document that created the Conquered thousands of years ago. But the tests took time and cost money, and there were so many new species being discovered all the time. Somewhere along the way, the tests stopped happening. Instead, officials started using shortcuts. They looked at physical features. Beings with exoskeletons were considered stronger and more advanced. Beings with soft bodies were considered primitive. Fragile meant stupid. That was the assumption. No one had tested Bora's species. No one had tested humans. They had just looked at small body and thin skin and decided she was not a person. Asked Bora if anyone had ever challenged this. Bora said some had tried. They had all failed. How could a non-person file a complaint? How could an object argue for its own rights? The system was designed to make resistance impossible. But saw something Bora did not. She saw a crack in the wall. The Founding Compact still existed. Its laws were still technically valid. If she could find a way to demand testing, if she could prove that Category 7 beings were sapient, the entire classification system would fall apart. Months passed. Learned the language well enough to understand conversations in the hallway outside. She learned that was afraid of inspections from the Conquered. The station was technically outside Conquered space, but Conquered officials sometimes came anyway. When they did, collectors became nervous. This meant the Conquered still had some power here. This meant there were rules that even had to follow. Started planning. She needed to escape. She needed to reach a Conquered official. She needed evidence of what was happening to Category 7 beings, and she needed to know the law better than anyone who might try to stop her. Helped her understand Conquered law. He had been a scholar on his home world before he was taken. He remembered much of what he had studied. Together, they went through every rule and regulation he could recall. They found old laws that everyone had forgotten. They found contradictions that no one had noticed. Bora helped in a different way. She had been in the collection longer than anyone except. She knew things about the station. She knew which guards were lazy. She knew which doors did not lock properly. She knew when supply ships came and how their crews moved through the building. The plan came together slowly. Would escape during a supply delivery. She would wear an environment suit that Bora had seen in a storage closet. She would carry a data chip with recordings of everything that happened in its collection. She would go to the Conquered embassy on the legitimate side of the station. The night before she was supposed to escape, Bora called her to the wall between their containers. The cracks on Bora's surface had grown worse. She did not have much time left. She knew she would not survive to see what might accomplish. Bora pressed her crystal hand against the wall. Her voice was weak but clear. She told to remember them. All of them. Every being who had been taken and sold and treated like nothing. Every creature who had died because the universe decided they were too fragile to matter. Pressed her own hand against the wall. She promised she would remember. She promised she would fight. When the supply ship came the next day, was ready. She did not look back as she walked out of her container. She did not look back as she pulled on the environment suit. She did not look back as she slipped through the door that Bora had told her would be unlocked. But she carried them with her. All of them. Every fragile being in every box in every collection across the galaxy. She was going to change everything. The legitimate quarter of station was different from the market side. The hallways were clean and well lit. Security officers walked in pairs. Signs pointed to offices and embassies and official buildings. Here, the Galactic Conquered had power. Here, laws meant something. Walked carefully. Her stolen environment suit was too big and it made her look strange. But no one stopped her. She was small and moved quickly. She kept her head down and followed the signs. The Conquered Embassy was a tall building made of white stone that seemed to glow from inside. Guards stood at the entrance. They were the stone-skinned species that had told her about. Each one was 3 times her height. Each one could crush her with one hand. Walked up to them anyway. The guards looked down at her with eyes like polished black rocks. One of them made a sound that her suit translated as laughter. "Small creature wants something," the guard said. "I want to file a complaint," said. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. "I want to see an official." The guards laughed again, but the embassy had rules. Anyone could file a complaint. Anyone could be heard. That was Conquered law. They let her inside. The waiting room was full of beings of every kind. Some were rich and powerful, dressed in fine clothes and surrounded by assistants. Some were poor and alone, sitting in corners and hopping for help. Took a number and found a seat. She waited. Hours passed. Her number was called. A small floating robot led her to a door at the end of a long hallway. The robot told her she had 10 minutes. 10 minutes to explain her problem. 10 minutes to ask for help. The room beyond the door was large and mostly empty. In the center sat behind a stone desk. He was old, even for his species. Cracks ran through his gray skin like rivers through rock. His eyes were tired but sharp. His name was High Arbiter. He had served justice for 300 years. Looked at the way someone might look at an insect that had wandered into their house. His face showed no expression. His voice was flat. "You wish to file a complaint," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," said. "Against whom?" Took a deep breath. She had practiced this moment in her head 1,000 times. "Against the classification system itself," she said. "Against the laws that allow sapient beings to be bought and sold as property." Stone face did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. He leaned forward slightly. "Explain," he said. Pulled out the data chip she had carried from his collection. She placed it on the desk. Article 7 of the Founding Compact states that sapient beings cannot be property, she said. Article 12 requires cognitive testing before any species can be classified. I have evidence that hundreds of species currently traded as Category 7 have never been tested, including my own species, including humans. Was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up the data chip and placed it in a slot on his desk. Images appeared in the air above them. Recordings from his collection. Beings in boxes. Beings being sold. Beings dying. "Where did you get this?" asked. "I was one of them," said. "I was captured and sold. I escaped." Watched the recordings for several minutes. His expression never changed, but his hands tightened on the desk. Small cracks appeared in the stone under his fingers. "You read the Founding Compact," he said finally. "Yes." "The entire document?" "Yes." Paused. "I am a lawyer." On my world, I defended people who had no one else to fight for them. I know how to read laws. I know how to find the truth hidden inside them. Made a sound like stones grinding together. Realized he was laughing. A Category 7 being who reads law, he said, who understands the founding compact better than most officials I know, who escapes captivity and walks into my office to demand justice. Said nothing, she waited. Stood up. He was massive, a mountain of gray stone that blocked out the light. He walked around his desk and stood in front of her. She had to tilt her head all the way back to see his face. "Do you understand what you are asking?" he said. "You want to challenge a system that has existed for thousands of years. You want to free hundreds of species. You want to destroy an industry worth more money than most planets." "I want the law to be followed," said. "The compact requires testing. The testing was never done. Everything that happened after is illegal." Was silent for a very long time. Then he did something did not expect. He bowed his head, just slightly, just for a moment. "I will hear your case," he said. "I will take it to the high tribunal myself." His legs went weak. She had hoped. She had planned, but she had not truly believed it would work. "Why?" she asked. Walked back to his desk and sat down. He looked at her with those tired, sharp eyes. "Because I have served justice for 300 years, he said, "and I have always known that something was wrong with the classification system. I just never had anyone brave enough to challenge it." He touched something on his desk. The floating robot appeared again. "Find this being a place to stay," said. "She will need protection. The Specimen Trade Consortium will not be happy when they learn what is happening." The robot beeped and floated toward the door, started to follow. Then she stopped. "Thank you," she said. Made that grinding sound again, his version of a smile. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "The hard part is just beginning. The tribunal has 7 species and all of them have reasons to keep things the way they are. They will fight you." "I know," said. "You could lose, you could be sent back to the markets, or worse." "I know." Nodded slowly. His respect for her seemed to grow. "What makes you think you can win?" he asked. Thought about Bora dying in her container. She thought about trapped in his sphere. She thought about all the beings she had met and all the ones she would never know. All the fragile creatures who had been told they were nothing. "Because I have to," she said. "Because if I do not try, then nothing will ever change, and I cannot live with that." She walked out of the room. Behind her, watched her go. Then he picked up the data chip and began making calls. The trial of the century was about to begin. The High Tribunal met in a chamber at the center of the conquered capital world. The room was round and built from materials taken from 7 different planets, one for each founding species. The ceiling was open to the stars. Light came from everywhere and nowhere. Stood at a small platform in the middle of the room. She was so small that they had to raise the platform 3 times before the tribunal could see her properly. Even then, she looked like a child standing before giants. The 7 judges sat in a half-circle around her. Each one was different from the others in every way. There was a like, but older and harder. There was a whose many eyes watched her without blinking. There was a being made of pure energy that shifted and flickered. There were others that had no names for, creatures so strange that her mind could not fully understand what it was seeing. The chief arbiter was something like a tree that had learned to move. Its voice came from everywhere at once. "The case before this tribunal," it said, "is a challenge to the Category 7 classification system. The petitioner claims that hundreds of species have been illegally classified without proper testing. She claims that the specimen trade is built on violations of the founding compact." Heard murmurs from the gallery behind her. Thousands of beings had come to watch. Some wanted her to win. Many more wanted her to fail. The specimen trade was worth fortunes. Powerful beings had built empires on buying and selling fragile creatures. The defense spoke first. The representative of the Specimen Trade Consortium, was a tall being with silver skin and a voice like honey. Its name was. It had argued cases before the tribunal for 200 years and had never lost. Walked towards platform, it smiled down at her. This case is simple, said. The petitioner is a Category 7 being. By definition, Category 7 beings lack the cognitive capacity for sapience. The very fact that she is here, attempting to argue before this tribunal, is itself proof of the system's error in allowing her to escape. She is not qualified to bring this case. She is not qualified to speak here. She is, according to established law, not a person. The gallery rumbled with agreement. Continued. It talked about tradition. It talked about economics. It talked about the thousands of years that the system had worked. It showed charts and numbers and expert opinions. It made everything sound reasonable and right. Then it made its final argument. Fragility is evidence of evolutionary failure, said. Species that cannot survive harsh conditions clearly did not develop the cognitive abilities needed for true sapience. This is simple biology. Category 7 beings are weak because they are primitive. They are primitive because they never evolved intelligence. The classification system recognizes this basic fact of nature. Returned to its seat, the tribunal turned to. She had no charts. She had no expert opinions. She had only herself and the truth. Spoke. The Founding Compact, Article 12, Section 3, she said. She had memorized every word. Before any species may be classified for trade or ownership, a full cognitive evaluation must be performed by certified officials. The results must be recorded and stored in the permanent archives. She paused. I searched those archives, she said. With the help of High Arbiter, I was given access to the classification records of every Category 7 species. She touched a control on her platform. Images appeared in the air. 847 species are currently classified as Category 7, she said. I found cognitive evaluation records for exactly 12 of them. 12 out of 847. The rest were classified based on physical characteristics alone. The tribunal stirred, the energy being flickered rapidly. Continued. She showed recordings from his collection. She showed Bora creating beautiful light patterns that told stories. She showed solving complex mathematical problems for his own amusement. She showed a dozen other Category 7 beings demonstrating intelligence, creativity, emotion. These are not primitive creatures, she said. These are people. They create art. They solve problems. They love and grieve and hope. They have been classified as objects because someone decided that soft skin means simple mind. She turned to look directly at the judge. The who captured me have an average of 12 years, she said. 12 years. My species lives for 80 or more. By the logic of fragility equals primitiveness, this should be the ones in boxes. The judge made an angry sound, but kept talking. She pointed at the being made of energy. You cannot survive without special containment fields, she said. One mistake and you would scatter into nothing. Are you primitive? Are you non-sapient? She pointed at the tree-like chief arbiter. You cannot move faster than a slow walk, she said. You cannot survive cold temperatures. You would die in the environment where I grew up. Does that make you less than a person? The gallery was silent now. Lowered her hand. Every species is fragile in some way, she said. Every being has weaknesses. You have built your concord on the idea that some weaknesses matter and others do not. You have decided that soft skin means no soul. You have built an empire on the bodies of creatures you never bothered to test. She looked at each judge in turn. The Founding Compact was written to prevent exactly this, she said. Your ancestors knew that it was easy to call someone less than a person. They knew that power would always find excuses to own the powerless. They wrote Article 12 to make sure that every being got a fair evaluation. Her voice grew stronger. You forgot that law, she said, or you chose to ignore it. For thousands of years, you have allowed beings to be taken from their homes, sold in markets, and worked to death. Not because they were truly non-sapient, but because they were small, because they were soft, because it was profitable to pretend they did not matter. She stood as tall as her small body would allow. "I am not asking you to feel sorry for us," she said. "I am not asking for mercy. I am asking you to follow your own law, test us, test all of us, every category 7 species that was never properly evaluated. And when the tests prove that we are people, do what the compact requires. Set us free." The silence lasted for a very long time. Then the chief arbiter spoke. "This tribunal will deliberate," it said. "The petitioner will wait." The judges rose and left through a door behind their seats. The gallery erupted in noise. Some beings were shouting in anger. Others were weeping with hope. Sat down on her raised platform. Her legs were shaking. Her heart was pounding. She had said everything she could say. Now she could only wait. The deliberation took 6 days. 6 days of sitting in a small room, not knowing if she would be freed or sent back to the markets. 6 days of hopping that somewhere in that chamber, 7 beings were finding the courage to do what was right. On the 7th day, they called her back. The chief arbiter stood. Its branches rustled like wind through leaves. "This tribunal has reached a decision," it said. Closed her eyes. "The petition is granted." Her eyes flew open. "All Category 7 classifications are suspended immediately," the chief arbiter said. "Full cognitive evaluations will be conducted for every species currently held under this designation. The specimen trade is hereby subject to investigation for violations of the founding compact." The gallery exploded. Could not hear anything over the noise. She could not see anything through her tears. She had won. 5 years had passed since the trial. The galaxy was not the same. Stood at the window of her small ship and watched the stars drift by. She was older now. There were lines on her face that had not been there before. Her hair had started to show traces of gray, but her eyes were the same, still sharp, still searching, still refusing to look away from things that needed to be seen. The ruling had changed everything. They called it the precedent now. She had asked them not to, but the name had spread anyway. It was taught in law schools across the Concord. It was mentioned in history books. It was the case that broke the Category 7 system and freed 847 species. The cognitive tests had taken 2 years to complete. Teams of evaluators traveled to every corner of known space, testing beings that had been bought and sold for generations. The results were not surprising too. Every single species passed. Every single one showed clear signs of sapience, intelligence, creativity, emotion, everything that made a being a person. The specimen markets on station were gone. The buildings still stood, but they were empty now. Some had been turned into museums. Some had been converted into housing for freed beings. The one where it had been sold was now a memorial. A plaque on the wall listed every species that had suffered there. It would take someone hours to read all the names. 17 species had been granted full Concord membership, including humanity. Earth knew about the galaxy now. There had been confusion at first, then fear, then a slow acceptance. Humans were not alone in the universe. They never had been. They had just been too small to be noticed before. Had gone home briefly. She had seen her mother, who had aged terribly in the years had been gone. She had held her cat, who had gotten fat and lazy in the neighbor's care. She had walked the streets of and tried to remember what her life had been like before. She could not stay. There was too much to do. The Legal Defense Coalition had been her idea. A group of lawyers and advocates from every newly freed species, trained to help others who were still fighting for recognition. There were always more cases. Always more beings who had been told they did not matter. Always more systems that needed to be broken. Trained them herself. She taught them how to read law, how to find the cracks, how to stand before giants and refuse to be afraid. Bora had not survived to see the ruling. Her crystal body had finally cracked beyond repair just days before the tribunal announced its decision, had been with her at the end. She had held Bora's hand as the light faded from her form. She had promised to remember. She remembered every day. Was still alive. His sphere had been fitted with better equipment that would keep him comfortable for many more years. He traveled with sometimes, teaching new advocates about conquered law. He was good at it. He had a patience that had never mastered. Today's ship was approaching station. She had been called there for a meeting. Someone wanted to see her, someone from her past. The station looked different now. Cleaner, brighter. The legitimate quarter had expanded. The dark corners where illegal trade had happened were full of shops and homes and schools. Children of a dozen species played in parks that had once been auction halls. Docked her ship and walked through the corridors. Beings recognized her as she passed. Some bowed. Some whispered to each other. Some just stared. She had gotten used to it. She did not enjoy it, but she had accepted that this was part of her life now. The meeting was in a small room near the old market district. Walked in and stopped. Commander stood by the window. The who had captured her all those years ago. The one who had looked at her with his many eyes and decided she was nothing. He looked old now. His shell had lost its shine. His movements were slow. "Thank you for coming," he said. Did not sit down. She did not move closer. "Why am I here?" she asked. Made a sound that might have been a sigh. "I collected thousands of beings in my career," he said. "I took them from their homes. I put them in boxes. I sold them to collectors who would watch them die." He turned to face her. "I never once considered that they might be people," he said. "Not once. They were small and soft and fragile. I was told they were not sapient. I believed it because it was easier to believe." Waited. "The ruling destroyed my life," said. "My ship was impounded. My crew was scattered. I lost everything I had built." "Are you looking for sympathy?" asked. Her voice was cold. "No," said. "I am looking for understanding. Not forgiveness. I do not deserve that. But understanding. I need to know how someone like you, someone I would have sold without a second thought, could change everything." Was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and stood beside him. Together, they looked out at the station, at the beings walking through streets that had once been lined with cages. "I did not change everything," she said. "The law was already there. The truth was already there. I just refused to be silent about it." "But you were so small," said. "You had no power, no weapons, no allies. How did you know you could win?" Thought about Bora. About all the beings she had met in collection. About all the ones she would never know. "I did not know," she said. "I just knew I had to try. Because the alternative was to accept that some beings matter less than others, and I could not accept that." Was quiet. His many eyes looked out at the station. "I am old now," he said. "I will die soon. My species does not live long, but before I go I wanted to tell you something." "What?" Turned to her. His voice was soft. "You were right," he said. "We were wrong. For thousands of years we were wrong, and I am sorry." Did not know what to say. She had spent years fighting. She had faced courts and committees and beings who wanted her dead, but she had never expected an apology, not from someone like. She reached out and touched his shell. It was warm and rough under her fingers. "That is all I ever wanted," she said, "for someone to see us, to really see us." Nodded slowly, then he walked past her to the door. "The galaxy is better because of you," he said. "Remember that. When the work gets hard and the days get long, remember that you made a difference." He left, stood alone by the window. Outside, the stars burned in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, beings were still suffering, still being told they did not matter, still waiting for someone to see them. Watched the stars for a long time. Then she turned and walked back to her ship. There was more work to do. There was always more work to do. But today, for just a moment, she let herself feel proud. She had been a small, fragile creature in a universe of giants. She had been told she was nothing. She had proved them wrong. And that was enough. That would always be enough.